The morning of my graduation from Harvard University felt unreal, like I had stepped into someone else's dream. Sunlight spilled across the red brick buildings, warming the historic courtyard where rows of white chairs stretched endlessly across the lawn. Crimson banners fluttered in the breeze. Families crowded the pathways, dressed in their best clothes, holding bouquets wrapped in cellophane that crackled like tiny fireworks. Laughter floated in the air. Cameras flashed. Proud parents wrapped their arms around their children, as if they were afraid the moment might disappear. I stood there in my cap and gown, gripping the tassel so tightly my fingers hurt. 4 years, countless nights. Countless doubts, and only one parent. My mother stood a few steps behind me, smoothing down the front of her simple navy dress. She didn't own designer handbags or silk scarves like some of the other parents. Her hands were rough from years of scrubbing office floors and washing dishes in the diner where she worked double shifts. But they were steady, strong. When she caught my eye, she smiled. That smile carried every sacrifice she had ever made. When I was 10 years old, my father walked out of our small apartment with a suitcase and a promise to come back soon. Soon became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became silence. At first, I kept checking the door every evening, convinced I would hear his key turn in the lock. I kept my drawings to show him, my report cards, my gold stars, but the door stayed closed, the phone stayed quiet. And my mother stopped mentioning his name. There were nights when the power flickered because the bills were late. Nights when my mother skipped dinner, pretending she had already eaten at work. I learned early how to stretch $1, how to study while the washing machine hummed in the background of someone else's house where my mother cleaned. I learned what exhaustion looked like, and I learned what strength felt like. By the time I reached high school, the word father had become something abstract like a storybook character. Other girls talked about their dads teaching them to drive or embarrassing them at school events. I smiled and nodded, pretending I understood. What I understood was this: if I wanted a future, I had to build it myself, so I did. I studied under flickering kitchen lights. I filled out scholarship applications at midnight. I worked part-time tutoring students who had far more than I ever did. And when the acceptance letter from Harvard arrived, my mother cried so hard she had to sit down. We did it, she whispered. Not you, we, that was always her way. Now, standing in the graduation courtyard, I searched the crowd one last time before the ceremony began. And then I saw him. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But no, there he was, weaving through the crowd in a tailored gray suit, his hair neatly styled, his smile wide and confident. My father, he looked prosperous, healthy, as if life had rewarded him for leaving. He didn't see me immediately. Instead, he stopped to shake hands with another family nearby. I watched his lips move. Yes, I'm her father, he said proudly. The words hit me like cold water. Her father, as if he had been there through every sleepless night, every missed meal, every tear my mother wiped away when she thought I wasn't looking. My chest tightened. He turned then and finally noticed me. For a brief second, something flickered across his face: surprise, maybe uncertainty. But it disappeared quickly. He opened his arms as if expecting me to run into them, and that was when I realized something. He hadn't come to celebrate me, he had come to be seen. The ceremony began with music drifting across the courtyard, soft and ceremonial, wrapping the crowd in a blanket of tradition. Faculty in flowing robes processed across the stage while families rose to their feet, applauding with pride that felt almost sacred. I sat in the front row with the other honor graduates, my heart pounding in a steady rhythm beneath the black fabric of my gown. As valedictorian, I would be speaking last. I had rehearsed my speech so many times that I could recite it even in my sleep. Every word had been carefully chosen. Every sentence carried years of struggle. Across the aisle, I saw him. My father had moved closer to the stage. Somehow, he had secured a seat far nearer than where general guests were assigned. He leaned back confidently, crossing one leg over the other as if this event had been arranged for him personally. Every now and then he glanced around to make sure people noticed him. When the dean of students from Harvard University stepped up to speak, my father clapped loudly, louder than anyone near him. He looked around again, smiling, soaking in the energy of the moment. Then my name was announced. The applause erupted like a wave. I stood slowly, feeling my knees tremble, and walked toward the podium. The world narrowed into sound and light. I could see my mother in the third row, clutching her purse with both hands, her eyes shining. This was our moment. I adjusted the microphone, took a breath. Good afternoon. I began, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. But before I could continue, a voice rang out from the audience. That's my daughter. The words were loud. Boastful heads turned, my stomach dropped. He was standing now. A few people laughed politely. Someone clapped again. My father lifted both arms as if he were the one being honored. All that intelligence, she gets it from me, he called out. The laughter grew louder. Heat rushed to my face. My fingers tightened around the edges of the podium. I told myself to continue. Ignore it. Stay focused. But he wasn't finished, to my horror. He stepped into the aisle and began walking toward the stage. There's a strange power in confidence, especially the kind worn by someone who has never had to earn it. He spoke quickly to one of the event coordinators near the steps, his expression serious, paternal. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could guess. Minutes later, he was climbing the stairs. My heart pounded in my ears. He reached the podium beside me and placed a firm hand on my shoulder, squeezing as if claiming ownership. Just a few words, he said into the microphone, not asking but declaring. The crowd quieted. I just want to say how proud I am of my daughter. He began smoothly. From the time she was little, I pushed her to aim high. I taught her discipline. I always told her she was destined for greatness. Each sentence felt like a theft. I remembered empty chairs at school plays, missed birthdays, the day my mother cried over unpaid rent. And here he was rewriting history in front of hundreds of people. I made sure she stayed focused. He continued. A child needs strong guidance. Without it, success like this simply isn't possible. My mother's face came into view over his shoulder. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She just looked invisible. That hurt more than anything he had said. He finished with a dramatic flourish. Today, I stand here as one proud father. Applause broke out, uncertain, hesitant, but real enough. Then he handed the microphone back to me, smiling as if expecting gratitude, as if expecting me to thank him. As if the last 14 years had never happened. The courtyard felt smaller now, the air heavier. He had stolen my story once by leaving. And now he was trying to steal it again. But this time, I wasn't 10 years old, and I wasn't powerless. The microphone felt heavier when he placed it back into my hands. For a moment the world blurred. The applause that followed his speech echoed strangely, like it belonged to another reality. One where he had been present, supportive, loving. One where he had earned the pride he wore so comfortably. He stepped slightly behind me but stayed on stage, close enough that his shoulder brushed mine. Claiming space, claiming credit, waiting for me to thank him. I could feel hundreds of eyes on us. Some faces were smiling warmly at the proud father. Others looked confused. A few glanced between us, sensing something wasn't right. I looked down at my speech. The words I had written about resilience and gratitude suddenly felt incomplete. Too small, too polite. My father leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't forget who helped you get here." The audacity of it made my chest tighten. Helped me, I remembered my 10th birthday, waiting by the window with a cake my mother had baked from a boxed mix. He had promised to come. I fell asleep on the couch, still wearing my party dress. I remembered filling out financial aid forms alone, because my mother didn't understand the paperwork, and there was no second parent to list. I remembered the night before my first college exam, when my mother called me from her late shift just to say, "No matter what happens, I'm proud of you." Not him. Never him. The courtyard breeze lifted the edges of my gown. I could hear someone coughing in the audience. A baby crying softly in the distance. Life continuing in tiny sounds while my own seemed suspended in a single decision. Stay silent or speak. My eyes moved to my mother. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at me. There was no instruction in her gaze, No anger, no demand, only quiet strength, the kind she had carried for years without applause. I inhaled slowly, steadying the tremble in my hands. Then I lifted my head. Instead of beginning my prepared speech, I looked directly at my father. Not past him, not through him at him. His smile faltered slightly under my stare. I leaned into the microphone. "Security," I said clearly, my voice ringing across the courtyard. "Please escort this man out." For a split second, there was silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Then a ripple of gasps spread through the crowd. My father blinked, confused. "What?" He laughed lightly, as if I had made a joke. "I don't know this man." I continued, my voice steadier than I felt. "He left when I was 10 years old. He did not raise me. He did not support me. He did not contribute to this education." Each sentence landed like a stone, dropped into still water. The murmurs grew louder. 2 uniformed security officers stepped forward from the side of the stage. They moved calmly but with purpose. My father's expression shifted, from amusement to irritation. "Don't embarrass yourself," he hissed under his breath. "You're being emotional." Emotional, the word he used whenever my mother tried to talk about unpaid bills. The word he used when I cried the night he packed his suitcase. One of the officers reached him gently. "Sir, we're going to need you to step down from the stage." He pulled his arm back. "This is my daughter's graduation, and this is my achievement," I replied quietly into the microphone. The crowd had gone completely silent now. He looked at me, as if seeing me, for the first time, not as a child waiting for approval, but as someone who no longer needed it. For a moment I thought he might argue louder, make a scene, but pride works differently when the spotlight shifts. The officers guided him toward the stairs. His polished shoes clicked sharply against the stage as he descended. No applause followed him this time, only whispers. The large wooden doors at the back of the courtyard opened, then closed behind him with a heavy finality. And just like that, the man who had once walked out of my life had been walked out of my graduation. I turned back to the microphone. My hands were no longer shaking. The doors closed behind him with a dull, echoing thud. For a few seconds, no one moved. The courtyard, so full of celebration moments before, felt suspended in something deeper. Not scandal, not drama. Truth. I stood alone at the podium, the microphone steady in my hands now. The air felt lighter, like something heavy had finally been lifted from my chest. I could have ended it there. I could have stepped away and let the ceremony continue as if nothing had happened. But silence had protected him for 14 years. It was time it protected us instead. I looked out at the sea of faces. Some shocked, some sympathetic, some uncertain how to respond. Then my eyes found my mother. She was still sitting in the 3rd row. Her posture hadn't changed. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, but her eyes, those tired, resilient eyes, were filled with something new. Not fear, not shame, relief. I swallowed and leaned toward the microphone. "I'm sorry for the interruption," I began gently. My voice carried clearly across the courtyard. "But today is about honesty and about gratitude." A hush settled again. "I stand here because one person never left," I continued. "One person worked double shifts. One person chose to stay when staying was hard." My mother's lips trembled slightly. She didn't have titles. She didn't have applause. She didn't have recognition. I paused, but she had strength. The word hung in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I am not self-made," I said. "I am mother-made." A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. I remember nights when the electricity flickered because bills were overdue. I remember watching her come home with hands cracked from cleaning chemicals. I remember her pretending she wasn't tired, so I wouldn't feel guilty for dreaming big. My voice wavered for the first time, but I didn't let it break. She never once asked for credit. She never once asked for praise. She just kept going. I stepped away from the podium. "Mom," I called softly. For a moment, she hesitated, shaking her head as if to say, "No, this is your day." But I shook mine back. "It's ours." The crowd parted as she slowly stood. She walked toward the stage with careful steps, as though afraid the ground might give way beneath her. When she reached me, I wrapped my arms around her. The embrace wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was home. And then someone began clapping. It was a single sound at first, clear, intentional, then another. And another within seconds. The entire courtyard rose to its feet. The applause this time was different. It wasn't polite, it wasn't confused, it was powerful, it was earned. I felt my mother's shoulders shake against mine as the sound swelled around us. She had spent her life, invisible, working behind closed doors, wiping away her own tears in silence. Now hundreds of people were standing for her. When the applause finally softened, I returned to the microphone with her hand still in mine. "This degree," I said firmly, "belongs to the woman who never walked away." I looked down at her. "And to every parent who sacrifices quietly, to every child who studies through doubt, to everyone who builds a future without applause." I smiled through tears. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't revenge at all. The crowd leaned in, its truth. Another wave of applause washed over us. Later, as graduates tossed their caps into the bright afternoon sky, I felt no bitterness, no anger. Only peace. He had come for recognition. He left with humiliation, but I hadn't stood up to destroy him. I had stood up to restore the right story, and as my mother squeezed my hand tightly, I knew something even sweeter than revenge had taken its place. Freedom.